If you want to learn all about offensive security and ways that your organization can maybe start looking like a porcupine compared to a turtle, you definitely don't want to miss out on this incredible conversation with Kareem Hijazi, incredible mind inside of this space. And he talks a lot about what his company Previalion does in order to make your company look less approachable and attackable from different types of hackers and people who actually want to exploit the data inside of your organization. So if you haven't done so already, make sure you go down below and hit that subscribe button as well as the bell icon so you don't miss out on incredible conversations just like this one as new episodes come out for the Simply Secure podcast. All right, with that, let's go ahead and dive into this incredible conversation with Mr. Kareem. Let's go. What up? What up? Welcome back to the Simply Secure podcast. I'm your host, Eddie Thomason, and I have an incredible guest for you guys to listen to, learn from, glean from. This guy is a wealth of knowledge, wealth of information. I think you guys are really going to get a lot of great tips and tricks from my man who's on the show today. I ain't even going to say his name. I'm going to let him do all the honors and introduce himself. So I'm going to flip it over to you, my man. Tell the people who you are and what you're excited about.
Thanks, Eddie. Thanks for having me here. My name is Kareem Hijazi. I am, among other things, a podcast host myself. I run, or actually created and host a podcast called The Introverted Iconoclast. It's quite the mouthful. I'm also the CEO and founder of a company called Previalion, which does what would arguably be considered offensive security. But we were very careful about how we frame that. In fact, that's probably one of the early conversations we're going to have, you and I, about all the the myths around it and all the realities. What the government effectively has an impact on that, and private sector, especially in light of today's world that we're in. Pretty amazing stuff. Had a long career in InfoSec before it was called cybersecurity. 26 years now or so. So early, mid to late 90s is when I really got into the game, and it progressively moved towards cyber into the 2000s, early 2000s. I was a consultant for that type of work, primarily around counterintelligence and countermeasure development. And in 2008 and 9 is really when I made the shift toward looking at product development, security products and capabilities, meshing of SaaS solutions with professional services, and off it went. I built a company in 2010 that got acquired by a company called Mandiant, which I think everyone knows who Mandiant is these days. That's recently acquired by, it was second largest acquisition by Google, if I'm not mistaken. I read that in the paper a couple days ago. Pretty massive.
It's great to be a part of that.
Yeah, phenomenal history and heritage there, and it's been an incredible ride, Eddie. I mean, you and I've had several conversations pre this recording, and probably a slew of different tangents that we could go down. But I'll leave it to you to get it started.
Absolutely, my man. So first off, I'm always like mind blown by the amount of things that you've already done, right? Like the amount of businesses that you already started, and your engagement inside of this industry
Mm-hmm.
for over 2 decades, right?
Right. Yeah.
I
Quite a
think
long
it's
time.
absolutely impressive.
Thank you.
And like I said, every time I talk to you, I'm like, bro, it's just mind boggling how much this guy already knows.
Very kind, brother.
But here's where I want to start, Kareem. And the fact is, you talked about this idea of framing offensive security,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the majority of us, I would say, from a corporate standpoint, we're on the defensive, right? We're
Absolutely.
typically playing defense
Yep.
more than we're playing offense. So, can you first tell us a little bit what defensive security is compared to offensive security, and then we can kind of go off a tangent from there.
Yes. Great starting point. Even the wording offensive security sounds contradictory in nature. It sounds counterintuitive, right? Because the only
Mhm.
people that seem to get it, I got to say, that are not in the industry are athletes and martial artists, coaches that say, yes, I mean, the old adages from sports, best defense is a good offense, all that, right? That people get that.
Yep.
Although when you start getting into the depths of it, then it gets to be a little bit political and controversial and everything else. Because the minute I start saying even the word offensive in my industry, if I use that word, everyone loses their mind, Eddie, bar none. Everyone, there's like, oh my God, you're hacking everyone. You're hacking back. That's the other term, hack back. And I'm like, no, that's the extreme version of what we consider, offensive. Not even security at that point. That's just flat out offensive, right? So the
Right.
definition of offensive security is making the um, making the approach by the adversary harder or painful for them to be able to hurt the victim or get inside the victim. What you said, which is absolutely correct, is this defensive posturing. And I actually did a podcast myself about defense mechanisms, and I parallelized the strategies that we've employed for the last 20 some years in cybersecurity more like a sea cucumber defense mechanism, which no one really
Mm.
knows about until I shared it in that podcast. And this is a bit
Hmm.
tragic, and I know people are going to be upset with me when I say this, but that's just what I do. Sea cucumbers
Right.
defend themselves by literally emitting their organs out to the predator to eat, and they hope the predator will be satisfied with eating its intestines, and then it skulks away to grow those intestines back. It literally gives away part of itself just to sort of stop the attack. Like, okay, just here, take it. Just don't kill me.
Wow.
Horrible. Then
Wow.
we've tried to graduate to armadillo or turtle like defensive, which is build a really good
Mm.
shell, which is what castle moat strategies are all about with cybersecurity, which is build a really good perimeter, build a
Mhm.
moat, and give yourself this compartmentalized, hermetically sealed environment that can't be penetrated. Well, that's a false hope as well, because inevitably something gets in, something gnaws at the outside of it until it finally finds its way in, or it tricks its way in through some sort of social engineering tactic. Again, it becomes a
Right.
problem. What we need to strive to get to is being more like a porcupine or something like a sea urchin,
Mm.
where predator comes after that. Yeah, you don't survive those all the time, but you certainly leave some damage on the adversary, and it does make them think
Hmm.
twice. It's like, look, soft underbelly of a sea cucumber over here or sea urchin over here. I guess I'm going to have the sea cucumber for lunch today, and that's exactly how hackers
Hmm.
think. So what I do with my firm, and this could be something that we go down kind of deeply, is I pursue intelligence on where adversaries have set up their infrastructure, and I have a very unique methodology for infiltrating that. And I do it legally. I do it with a lot of assistance with law enforcement and the intelligence community. So this is not some sort of rogue private company doing anything terrible. We
Hmm.
have a very innovative way of collecting intelligence on where the adversaries have set up, and we use their tactics against them. We essentially hide ourselves from their ability to find us, which frustrates them, causes them to spend more money on their OPSEC. We basically flip the
Hmm.
script on them and make them actually spend more money on their attacks than they would otherwise. And that actually is what stops attackers from doing things. When you start hitting the wallet and they have to actually use the same things that we have to do on the defensive side, now you can actually have a true impact on the future of offensive defensive positioning. And yes, the
Hmm.
part I mentioned, which everyone's going to zero in on that's listening carefully, is yes, we do infiltrate the hackers' infrastructure. So we do get inside their environments, we do see what they're doing, and we deliver that intelligence to the would-be victims or the actual victims. And it's pretty unprecedented. And I'm hoping I can have copycats follow me. I'm not looking to be the only one in the world doing this, and I'm certainly not. It
Right.
just I'm one of the few in this country. There's quite a few in Israel and others that tend to be quite cavalier in that approach. So that was a
Gotcha.
broad overview. Hopefully, it gave you some context.
No, it was great context.
Hmm.
I want to spend some time on what you just finished with, and this idea of the mindset that
Hmm.
infiltrating, the bad guys per se, quote unquote,
Right.
right, is a bad thing
Hmm.
by the rest of the industry, from the perception of the rest of the industry.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit why that's the case? Like, what
Yeah.
do you know some of the reasons why that's an underlying thought,
Hmm.
and what's preventing people to maybe make that mindset shift to believe that it's time to take that porcupine approach? I'm going to use that a lot because I
Yeah.
love that, by the way.
Sure.
But time to
Please do.
start taking that porcupine approach compared to the turtle or the moat
Yes,
type of
exactly.
approach.
And this is going to sound again. This whole conversation is probably going to be a series of weird, counterintuitive statements by me, but I think you'll get why.
Yeah.
I actually agree with the community about offensive is not good, generally speaking. It sounds funny because I
Okay.
just said I hope people follow in my footsteps. What I was saying is follow my footsteps with the strategy I've taken, which is good cooperation with public sector and the intelligence community and law enforcement, where I'm not overstepping my boundaries as a private sector company. I have a very unique methodology for doing it. I'm not just arbitrarily finding a target and going after it. There's a very measured and thoughtful approach to the pursuit, and it's usually again in symphony with some sort of authorized group to do that. So when you
Mhm.
go on a rampage to try to copycat Kareem, please follow that advice first. Make sure you don't do
Yep.
this because that is what people have an issue with and take issue with. And I completely agree.
Gotcha.
We're actually seeing that happen right now. We're seeing it with the hacktivist situation going on with Ukraine and Russia. There's some people that are well-intentioned that have skills, and they're wanting to go and attack, not defend, but attack the aggressor. And while that sounds good in theory, you have situations where you're working without a complete set of intelligence, and get you might be opportunistically getting in someplace because you happen to get lucky, and you take something down because you think you're now, this vigilante hero doing what's right. And, in your mind you are. And by every standard, you kind of are, to the little bit of information you have. Your aperture on what you're attacking is what you're attacking. You don't realize what the ramifications could be. Several weeks ago, a group attacked a satellite monitoring system in Russia, and they took it down. Now, here's where it gets interesting and problematic. This group didn't really understand the ramifications of that takedown. Now, while it's on the surface looks like a win that you're hobbling the aggressor, it triggered a response by the Russian government that they're under attack by someone, who cares who it is. We're going to go on the offensive. And they literally, I'm not saying that the explicit reason Putin put nuclear missiles on high alert was that, but I have to think that in some situation, or if it was a contributing factor, we could be escalated. That effort could have escalated us towards something horrific. And that's a really dramatic example. But the other thing is that you might be attacking a target you perceive to be bad, but it's some poor grandmother's computer in Idaho that's been compromised by a bad guy, and there's not enough intelligence around who and what you're attacking. It looks clearly like some sort of adversarial infrastructure, but you don't do enough homework to figure out that it's actually a victim that's being used as a hop point or kind of a proxy for the adversary. So you're really hurting someone innocent. So there's so many factors that go into why it's not a good thing to do it. But under the right circumstances, with the right level of intelligence and with the right authorizations, it's extremely effective.
Absolutely. So my question to you, because like you said, it's not having the right intelligence is what
Mm-hmm.
really makes this a risky
Yes.
move, right? It makes it a very risky thing to do.
Right.
So my question to you, I know, and as much as you can share, because I know
Sure.
with you working with law enforcement and different things like that, there's certain levels of things that you can disclose,
Of
right?
course. Sure.
But what does that intelligence looks like? Is there any way for people to access that intelligence in order for them to make better decisions to
Mm-hmm.
go on the offensive, or is that information always locked down from a 100% law
Classified.
enforcement
Yeah.
perspective?
Right. Right. So
Okay.
there is plenty of intelligence that you can get in an open source capacity that is not classified. In fact, that's in many cases what even the law enforcement groups in the intelligence community do utilize in conjunction with what they get in a classified capacity. And they use those two sources of intel to come to a pretty definitive or high confidence conclusion, is the way I should probably put it. So my team, I have an intelligence team that works inside my company that spends their entire day poring over all the evidence to support an action, and we build a case essentially around it. We build what we call a conviction document, is literally what that is, and it literally lists out all the already established evidence to support why this particular target is worth going after. I'm being a little bit nebulous with the terminology target. There's a specific thing that's normally our target, but I don't want to have people hear this and try something inadvertently. But when we are able
Yeah.
to get really good confirmed intel, I say confirmed, there's no such thing as 100%, but high confidence intelligence that this is truly malicious, and it's nothing but malicious, meaning it's not some, again, computer that's, Kareem's computer at home or my son's Xbox or, Eddie's wife's computer. It's,
Yeah.
that's the dangerous part of this. Then we can go and take the action that's necessary. And what's interesting is, be, and this is unique to us, and this is what I encourage, taking an action in some
Mhm.
arguably offensive way where you don't know what the result is, you just sort of hope that that was a good choice, is really, really gambling.
Yep.
We have the luxury of
Mm.
taking an action and seeing an immediate influx of intelligence that we gather from that effort. So if we make a mistake, which is always possible, we're human at the end of the day, my team's phenomenal, but they're still ultimately fallible. We can roll back what happened very rapidly. So there's things here that are safeguards in place to make sure.
Gotcha.
But yeah, people, and sorry to answer your question more explicitly, the vast majority of what we use is open source to make those decisions.
Okay. That makes perfect I mean, it does make sense.
Mm-hmm.
It is nice. I mean, it's nice to know that it is open source and, some information is actually out there.
Right.
But like you said, it's very important to have some of those other pieces in place to
Yes.
make sure that you're not poking the wrong bear, is
Yeah,
essentially what it comes down to, right?
exactly. No, you're entirely right. Because the other thing about this that we didn't touch on really is that, if you're an individual or even just a group, I'm kind of referring to the
Mhm.
hacktivist types. You bring up an excellent point, Eddie. I
Yep.
mean, look, these people don't take kindly to disrupting their infrastructure. They don't like you very much for messing with their money. And if it's a
Yep.
nation state actor that you're tangling with, well, now you're talking about a whole other level of risk. You're talking about kinetic risk, and it is something that
Right.
has to be acknowledged. You know,
Absolutely. So here's my question for you, Kareem.
sure.
When you look at, again, stand on this mindset of offensive
Hmm.
security, right? So obviously, one of the biggest breaches that's happened in recent weeks is the Okta
Yeah.
breach, right?
Yep.
Curious to know, should companies like Okta and some of these big companies in general, right, who have security teams, dedicated security teams, should they have, say, a team dedicated to, when we are being hacked, let's figure out how we can hack the hacker, right?
Hmm.
I'm curious to know your thoughts on that, if that's a yes or no question, and then expand on it. Why?
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's yes, why should that be a thing,
Right.
right?
Right.
And if it's no, why shouldn't it be?
Yeah. Um, the answer is no, which is strange.
Okay.
Again, only because the likelihood that a non cybersecurity or intelligence organization by nature. Now, Okta is a, authentication company, so they live in the realm of security, but that doesn't make them intelligence professionals, nor will they necessarily build a team that is going to be sufficient to handle that. What I would suggest as the alternative is consult and
Mhm.
work with organizations that can preemptively give them an idea that they may be targeted, because so this gets into a nice segue between postmortem, stopping it once the attack has begun and then going into an incident response state, versus
Mhm.
preemptively or proactively managing the risk, where that's almost the closest thing you're going to get to offensive, which is you're preempting an attack completely. That whole idea of the sea
Got
urchin
you.
looks terrifying. Leave that one alone. If Okta,
Right.
now their situation was really interesting because it sounds like the adversary basically gamed the multi-factor authentication capability that was there. They basically,
Mhm.
I think it was called prompt um, stuffing, not stuffing. What's the word? Where are you familiar with how now you can use your multi-factor authentication by having a prompt pop up on your phone instead of having to go to your MFA app or get a text? Have you seen that yet?
Yes. Yep.
If they figured
Yep.
out, if they harangue an executive in the middle of the night over and over with that prompt, eventually they'll wake up irritated and just okay, fine, whatever this is, just shut up, shut my phone up. They social engineered the MFA out of someone
Mhm.
to blow past it. That's genius. I hate to give credit to the bad guys, but they figured
Yeah.
out the perfect mixture of social engineering, human response and conditioning, and technical
Mhm.
understanding of how this works. It was brilliant because that prompt, I tested it the other day. There's no
Mhm.
limit to how many times you can send it. It's totally
Wow.
flawed because you can eventually get, I mean, unless you're a guy like you or me, my family or friends of mine, yeah, whatever, whoever said this, sure. I didn't do it, but I'm
Right.
sure it's
Right.
legitimate because it says Google saying, okay, should I do it or not? So
Yep.
that's hard to defend. And what I wouldn't, what would be dangerous here, and this is going to get into why I think no, you're not going to know who it
Yep.
is. And so if you don't know who, how are you going to respond? You might be able to mitigate the attack, but now you're basically just disarming possibly or nullifying the weapon that was being used against you. But to say the weapon was used by a specific group is extremely hard. The government has a hard time doing it. I don't even know it. So I know that what's interesting is in many cases, I just know an environment is malicious. I don't necessarily know who the actual group is, but I spend my time confirming that
Mhm.
the environment is particularly nefarious. Now, if they are capable of hiring a team of substance that can help identify and deliver that intelligence to a group that can be more effective, like law enforcement, rock and roll. But going off in
Mhm.
like kind of a vigilante approach, then you because
Mhm.
imagine all these companies that are attacked by this group having a slew of different companies coming after them. We'd have the same problem we have with the Ukrainian Russian problem now.
Mm. Yep. Yep. That makes sense.
Yeah.
That definitely makes sense. Okay. So if that's the case, if the answer is no for that,
Hmm.
right? How do you become the porcupine? Talk about that. How
Yeah.
does a company become the porcupine
Right.
instead of hopefully they're not the sea urchin anymore. But
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
what kind of things or processes should they have in place
Yep.
for these hackers to be able to look at it and be like, "Oh no, I'm not touching that.
Yep.
I'm going to go over to this
So
to the sea urchin over here."
totally right. So we ended up I'll speak for our own company. We're obviously a target
Mhm.
because people, it's gotten to be pretty well known that we're disrupting some of the infrastructure that some of the ransomware groups set up, to get reconnaissance
Mhm.
done in these environments. And these are very well funded individuals and groups, unfortunately. So they're it's kind of a dangerous proposition. And what we did
Mhm.
was we made it pretty clear that we use the influx of attacks on us as new targeting for our process. So not that we're welcoming
Mhm.
someone to attack us, but it is a little bit like, hey, you come my way, you get on our map. It's not always the other way around, just and that
Mhm.
subtle level of intimidation can be very interesting. In other words, if a company can create it's a narrative, actually, Eddie, more than it is a technology. It's a narrative that
Mhm.
we have an apparatus built up to watch for incoming or attempted infiltrations. And when we find them, they get looked into and they become new pursuits by us, whether it's to deliver that
Right.
information to law enforcement or to organizations that can take action on our behalf. Because if a hacker believes that their skills may not be up to snuff and that they may jeopardize their entire operation, because if they attack this group's going to disclose the operation and they'll lose all of their access, they won't attack that group.
Right.
It now become that spiny problem for them.
Exactly. It's like they'll rather, you know, forego their ego,
Yeah.
right? Because of the frustration
Yes.
of like, man, I want to hack these people
Yeah.
because they're causing me such a pita, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the same time, I shouldn't because it's gonna send me down a rabbit trail and cost me so much more than I would gain, right?
Exactly. If they give me a thread to pull, Eddie, I'm pulling the thread and I'm going to unravel the sweater.
Hmm.
That's basically the way to put it, right? In other words, don't give me a thread. Don't even
Yep.
try, because if your attempts on me is a thread that gives me something to pull on, and I'll give that to my intel team and we'll
Right.
ferociously unravel that sweater, because that's the business we're in. So in essence,
Hmm.
not encouraging attacks. My point is that it's like, look, so yeah, this goes back to this idea that we all know this is a precept in information security. All hackers
Hmm.
always go for low hanging fruit. They always go that route. They're never going to go the hard path. There's some hacktivists with egos involved. You're absolutely correct, that really want to do it for the mission and nation states generally, if they have a specific target, they will work on that target endlessly. That's true. But
Yep.
ransomware groups, like, I mean, we go to the history books right now. Colonial Pipeline, man, they had
Hmm.
those credentials from the dark web and they just rolled on in through the VPN. There was no hacking.
Hmm.
That was just access done. They didn't have to do any
Yeah.
work. There was no work involved. It was just,
Right.
oh, here's my way in, throw in the malware and does some reconnaissance, and then package of ransomware, that encrypted everything, and they sat and waited. So it's,
Right.
and a huge deal, right? Big deal. Made noise across the world with Colonial and JBS as well. Most of the ones that you hear
Hmm.
about are not some hacker that worked endlessly for months sweating to get inside this organization. It's rarely the case.
Right. So, quick question for you then,
Hmm.
Kareem. You mentioned something as you were discussing when you get a thread, you're going to unravel the sweater, right?
Hmm.
So just curious, if a company, larger organization, a thread is open towards them. You said you hand that thread over to your Intel team.
Hmm.
Is there a quote unquote Intel team that companies can hand this thread over to in order to create that porcupine type of um narrative inside for their own organization,
Yeah.
in order for that to really become effective?
So, at the risk of sound like I'm plugging my own firm, that's exactly what benefits our customers, right? Because we're
Mhm,
one of the few things that most cybersecurity products don't get advertised by their users. No one goes,
mhm.
"Yes, I'm a proud user of some AV, whatever." You never hear that. Rarely do you hear it. I mean, every now and then you know how it is in a company. You have to eke out testimonials. It's hard to get, right?
Tell me about it, man. We're still trying to get testimonials at Data Locker.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard because and there's a for the customer, there's in their minds a very good reason. They don't want to allow anyone to know
Mhm,
what their defense mechanisms are. They don't want to have anyone, they want to broadcast what an adversary needs to get around, right? That's their problem.
exactly.
With us though,
Yep.
it's the opposite. It's one of those things like they can proudly be like, "Oh yeah, we have Previalion watching our infrastructure
Mhm,
and that is the deterrent." So again,
mm,
there's other companies that do similar types of approaches that can have the same effect. So I'm not one of the only ones in the world that certainly have that effect, but it's not saying, "Hey, I use this company that built a really big, thick wall for my firm," because that's not scary. That just means I got to get a bigger
mhm,
pickaxe, or I got to social engineer my way through the gates of the castle. That's all that means. When
right.
the narrative is no, on the wall there's a bunch of FLIR thermal cameras watching the outside looking for anything moving that has a heartbeat, then they're like, "Oh crap, okay, I can't get near the wall
Mhm.
because I could get spotted." And that's kind of the metaphor.
I love it. So I mean, I don't think it's bad for you to shamelessly plug your company there. I I,
Sure.
I actually want to take the time, tell people how can they connect with you. Is
Sure.
it a way for them to reach out to you specifically? Do you
Yeah.
bring them through like a onboarding process? What does that look like for companies to be able to host that name, right? Like, hey, no
Sure.
man, I got Pavilion look watching out for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really involved, and I believe in extremely personal interaction, especially with this nature of security. It's not something that we just shovel their way and then walk away. It's very interactive. It's not the beautiful part. It's not much of a deployment. There's absolutely zero deployment. Frankly, we just need to help them understand what their attack surface, or maybe they'll let us know what that is, and then we can let them know that unfortunately something either inside their environment already. So now we can help them root that out, or we can help them preemptively in a control security control analysis perspective, and we can get into that. But yes, me is probably I'm the best point of connection there, and I'm huge on LinkedIn. You probably know that now, Eddie. That's my big one that I decided to zero in on. It's hard to do it on all of them. I commend the folks that somehow manage to maneuver thousands of social media accounts everywhere. It's like, how do you do that?
It's got to be a team. It's got to
Yeah,
be a team.
it's got to be. But LinkedIn's a really good
A
place to find
team
me.
and
Yeah.
or somebody that's very oh, sorry.
No,
I
no.
was
Yeah.
saying it's either a team or somebody that's very, very organized, right? Like melancholy by nature and can
Yes.
plan out all their content, months in advance before this stuff needs to go out.
Totally correct. Totally correct. Yeah. No, and I think that that's where,
Yep. I didn't mean to cut
yeah.
you off. You
No,
said LinkedIn
it's
is the
good.
best place for people to reach you.
Yep. And then Prevailion, the website, Prevailion.com. It's PREVAILION.com. It's like prevailion.com. So easy to find.
So, what do you think? Was that helpful? There's incredible conversations just like this one all throughout this channel. The links on the screen, the videos that you'll see, is actually other videos that's very similar to some of the conversations that I had right here with this guest. So feel free to go ahead and binge watch some of these incredible conversations with other cybersecurity leaders within the space. And if you found value, feel free to go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below, as well as hit the like button because it helps YouTube push this content and this channel to other people in the industry just like you. And obviously, those are the people that I'm trying to reach. So I appreciate you and look forward to seeing you again on the next one. Deuces.